everybody, this is Steve with Real Progressives. Tonight we're going to talk about this coming battle royale that looks like it's going to be way off in the future, mind you. Looks like Bernie Sanders versus Donald Trump, or at least let's talk about what that might look like coming in to focus as we go into this primary season. Folks, the Democratic Party hasn't done a whole lot to change. It's made some rule changes. It's changed the way superdelegates vote a little bit. It's changed the way the weighting goes in terms of how votes get brought to each candidate. It's a 15% threshold. If a candidate doesn't reach that, they don't get any of these votes. There's a lot of things going on out there that give the perception that we could have a fair election. Let's assume for a minute, let's assume that enough people are awake, enough people have seen what the DNC did last time, enough people are so hyper aware that they won't allow the DNC to do it again. Let's hope that enough of the people that are going to fight tooth and nail for Bernie Sanders, continue that fight no matter what. And let's just assume a lot of things that didn't happen in 2016 happen in 2020. Let's just assume that. So when you look at the way this is stacking up, we've seen nothing change at all with Bernie Sanders' tactics, with his focus, with the prescriptions that he's laying forth, with the primary approach to building a new America through progressive agenda that he largely owns. Other people have stepped up and said, I like what he says, and they've tried to make it part of themselves. But everybody has not been focused. And you listen to what they say, and they're all over the map. They're following headlines, they're chasing ideas. Bernie is staying dead center perfect on his message. Now, he's taken some hits here recently, some friendly hits. Maybe there's some merit in it. Maybe there's not some merit in it. Maybe it's a matter of nuance, or maybe it's a conversation that needs to be had. But the subject of reparations came out. And reparations seems to be a tripwire, if you will, in this whole discussion point going forward. Now, I'm not here to tell you what reparations looks like or doesn't look like. It's not really my place to do that. In the future, we're going to have some guests on here that can really take a deep dive into what that looks like. And we're working on securing those guests now. But I want to talk a little bit about the parameters, anyway, of what some of Bernie Sanders' proposals look like and what some of the common mainstream narratives of reparations look like, and see if we're sort of in the same ballpark, okay? Number one, people are asking for a UBI, a universal basic income. And we've typically told people that a universal basic income isn't really what will help poverty. It's not the one thing that's going to help poverty. Everybody, of course, would like to have a little bit of money in their pocket. Everybody would, of course, like to have an opportunity to have cash in hand. But what really comes down to is the people at the bottom that desperately need that money really don't need the money so much as they need the services that that money can buy. So there's no price anchor to a UBI. A UBI is inherently inflationary because there's no productive output coming, and therefore there's nothing to hold the price down. And so as you give people more money, naturally the prices of goods and services go up because there's competition for scarce resources. All right, the flip side is that when you look at a job guarantee, federal job guarantee pegs the economy to labor. Now all of a sudden humanity, men, women, workers, are the thing that are pegging the economy, that are serving as the price anchor by setting the wage floor, by setting the job standard as the peg to the economy. What you've done is you've put a basic price stabilizer in there by setting the wage floor with a federal job guarantee. See the difference? All right. So when you look at reparations and talking with various individuals, and you look at folks like Derek Hamilton. Derek Hamilton has spent his career pursuing racial justice and has predominantly focused his time on income inequality and the economy at large and how it impacts minorities, in particular African Americans. He came up with a really interesting proposal called baby bonds. And baby bonds are basically so much money is put into a fund. And when you come of age, you get this lump sum, no matter what your station in life. Boom. And it basically is dependent on, the money that you get coming in, so that, the wealthy aren't benefiting, disproportionately to the poor. And it gives people a leg up. This is one of the ideas. And this is not serving in replacement of reparations, but it is a program with reparations in mind. This is an opportunity to satisfy inequality that exists, that's been systematic or systemic, and has dramatically changed the fortunes of minorities in this country. This is one approach to looking at a reparations-like thing, but it is not reparations. There's still a cash component, but there's a services component, right? And you look at the services that would be required to be able to help those who have been tragically left behind. And you look at it, you say, well, a federal job guarantee is part of a reparations-minded approach that eradicates involuntary unemployment forever. A job guarantee sets the wage floor at a living wage. That's the goal. Federally funded, locally administered. Now, everybody is eligible for the federal job guarantee, but the people who really need a job guarantee will have a job guaranteed. This is an opportunity, once again, to eradicate huge swaths of inequality. Really, really destroy the chains that bound so many to generational poverty. So it's another program with reparations in mind, but not reparations, once again. And you look at healthcare, and you look at all these different programs that dramatically help the poor and marginally help those above. It helps no matter what. But the point is, it's another service that has reparations in mind. It's not reparations in no way, shape, or form, but it's another reparations-minded program. So now you look and see all these different groups that have received paychecks or whatever, or they've been given some sort of a financial settlement. The issue always comes down to this. What is the fallout of giving a UBI, for example? Well, the right wing makes no mistake about it. They're eager to see us take a UBI because they're eager to rip apart the social safety nets. They're eager to rip apart the services, the social services that hold society together. Because there's no price anchor to those services if they're not given by the government. The government absorbs price changes. But if you're responsible to pay for those services with your UBI suddenly, which is what the GOP and libertarians would love to see happen, they would love to see you taken out of that mix. They want to be able to make it so that they can profit off of it once again. And by doing this, that cash in hand, whether it be a UBI, whether it be some sort of subsidy, or whether it be reparations, if there's not something on the end of it that's tied to it that makes that money hold on to some good or service, there's a good chance that it hasn't satisfied any of the real needs and underlying inequality baked into the system, which in many minds, reparations would include as well. So how do you create a proper reparations that takes away the right wing's desire to say, we gave you your cash, why aren't you better? Why aren't you healed? Why aren't you perfect? Why aren't you just floating through? See, we're better than you. Horrible, evil mindedness. But that has always been the take. Here's some cash. Only the strong survive. You lose once again. And that is the concern, the fear of any cash-based handout when it comes to the UBI, or something more importantly like a payback, not a handout, a payback for lost wages, lost investments, lost life in reparations. Even that. Now, unless that is coupled with the services that make those people who have been left behind whole, unless there's investments in job training, investments in housing, investments in all kinds of things that bring about an equal society, to simply just cash leaves a huge hole for those who have tragically been left further behind than others. So the question always comes down to, with any of these, how do we guarantee the services that people need will be there? And I think that when you talk about what reparations looks like, I think the people that have been most affected by it, in particular the ADOS folks, the African descendants of slaves, have every right in the world to call out what that should look like. They're the aggrieved. They're the ones who have suffered. And they're the ones that should be able to lay this out. But I think it's important to note that the concerns that have been brought up, and this is not, white splaining. This is not some white dude. I am white. But this is from African Americans who I speak to. And this is the kinds of discussions I want to hear. I want to be able to bring out, because there's so many people that have so many different ideas of what this should look like. What amount of money would be equal? And think about this, folks. We're going back a long time. We're talking about generations of lost income, lost investment interest, lost opportunities for land, and for all kinds of things. I mean, we're not just talking about here's a check and go on your way. Folks, we're talking about what would you have done? What is the net present value of a dollar that should have been given 150 years ago and passed on through generations today? So there's a lot of calculations going on there, folks. And there's a whole lot that needs to be done to make right this blemish on everyone's lives, our entire existence. So when I hear Bernie Sanders say that he doesn't know what that looks like, he wants to have a panel, I would assume that that panel would be African descendants of slaves, laying out what it would take in their mind, in their communities, to truly rectify the egregious evil that has been done to them and their families. All right. We'll get to more of that in a future episode. But I think that it's important to hit that one right on the head, because in order to defeat Donald Trump, we're going to need to have the full complement of the progressive community. So I want to make sure that we have an understanding of what these two gentlemen are. Bernie Sanders is running on a federal job guarantee. It's not a job guarantee for some, it's a job guarantee for all. Donald Trump, not so much. Bernie Sanders is running on Medicare for all. Donald Trump, not so much. Bernie Sanders is running to push a Green New Deal. Donald Trump thinks climate change is a hoax. Bernie Sanders is running on infrastructure, wanting to build infrastructure out in this nation, wanting to expand Social Security, wanting to get high-speed rail, wanting to have paid family and medical leave, which I know Trump has dallied about, but Sanders is pretty firm on. You look at all these things, and you say, wow. Sanders has even talked about student debt cancellation, free college for all, trade school. Trump, that's not the language of Trump. That's not the focus of Trump. The people that Trump serves think that the national debt is some horrible boogeyman that has to be dealt with. The people supporting Sanders, the economic minds, know the national debt is a joke used to keep the 99% suffocating. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about nothing less than the entire progressive agenda. The progressive agenda, which we have been fighting for years. That's what's at stake here. And you're going to hear the centrists come out of the woodworks, the Joe Bidens of the world who are going to come out as moderates. And, oh, let me tell you, folks, we have lived 40 plus years of this so-called moderation. It's been a lot longer than that. But this conservative-minded, markets-driven approach is a not all Democrats are cut from the same cloth. Not all progressives are really actually progressive at all. You know, Professor Bill Mitchell says that most progressives are not really progressive at all, but they are neoliberals. Neoliberals believing that the government somehow or another is broke, that it's dependent on tax dollars to be able to afford programs. We talked about this last night, where people think that we have to cut the military in order to somehow or another afford all these other programs. Now, the real resources tied up in the military may come in conflict with being able to address climate change. But there's also the possibility the military could be a spearhead in terms of rebuilding our infrastructure, in terms of mobilizing to get a Green New Deal acted upon. There's a million ways to repurpose things and to ensure that we have done what we have to do with the 99% to address the calamity of climate change, this disaster that is coming. It is coming, folks. It is coming. It's not some, pie in the sky thing. And so as I look at this freaking crazy concept that somebody else is going to pull it all together to make us get where we need to be, I just keep focusing on what is it that we want anyway? What the hell is it we want? Do we want to get rid of corruption? Who doesn't? Everybody wants to get rid of corruption. Do we want to have a Green New Deal? Well, the numbers say we do. Do we want a federal job guarantee? The numbers say we do. Do we want universal health care? The numbers suggest we do. Do we want to have a complete overhaul of our nation's infrastructure and energy grid? The numbers say we do. Folks, the Overton window is a hugely important concept. And what the Overton window talks about is the realm of possibility in any given cycle, the realm of things that can possibly get done based on popular opinion, based on the knowledge of voters, based on the current environment, etc. And I'm telling you right now, at no point in time in my lifetime has a progressive agenda even been possible. It's not been possible. Obama had a chance to do it, but Obama proved he was nothing but a neoliberal. Obama did not champion a progressive agenda at all. I'm sorry, folks. He was probably a really slick dude, looked great in a cowboy hat, had a mean jump shot, but dude was not a progressive. Dude was 100% a new Democrat, which is a Bill Clinton Democrat, which is a corporate Democrat, which is everything progressives should be against. This is not a matter of, what do you want, Trump? I just laid out clearly. Trump is not what we want. But Bernie Sanders, it's not so much just Bernie. It's the apparatus. It's all the organization. It's all the people. It's all the energy. It's the movement. It's the movement. We have a movement that never stopped from 2015. Yes, some people jumped ship, and that's a shame. You don't even have to like Democrats to be able to understand the movement. You don't even have to support the DNC to understand the movement. You could be an independent and get the movement. You could be an enlightened green that understands the movement. You could be a libertarian that recognizes this is a better way and get the movement. This isn't so much a political story as it is a movement story, a populist left story. And I say left only tongue-in-cheek because, quite frankly, even this, what we're looking at, would be more centrist, center-left for the rest of the world than in the United States. In the United States, this seems radical because we've denied ourselves so much for so long. But here we got this old dude. They're going to paint him as a socialist. Be ready. Be ready to answer the question of what socialism really is, and not just repeat stupid shit you heard in the bar stool. It's about knowing your subject matter. It's about being able to paint out the economic message, the economic underpinnings that allow for these massive programs to occur. And no, my friends, you are not going to tax your way to a Green New Deal. Sorry, it's not going to happen. You're not going to tax your way to free college. You're not going to tax your way to a federal job guarantee. You're not going to tax your way to any of this. So I want to give you a quick MMT primer. This is going to be short, nothing major. MMT, for those of you who don't know this, is modern monetary theory. It is the economic message that is catching the world on fire and has been brewing for a long time. You just didn't know about it. But now all of a sudden it's caught the attention of people like Paul Krugman. And it's caught the attention of all the media elite. And it's caught the attention of people at the Fed like Michael Powell and others. And it's got their dander up. It's got their hackles up. Because what MMT does is it strips away all the mythology. It strips away all the fiscal rules that we put in place to kind of make us behave. And it just shows us the truth of how a fiat currency works. That's right. In 1971, we left what is known as the Bretton Woods Accord, which was a global gold standard. And this gold standard basically said, hey, everybody, we're going to exchange our currency back and forth, pegging against the dollar, which was on the, gold. It mapped to gold. Well, Richard Nixon, because the friggin' French, as usual, were trying to demand their debt repayments, if you will, in gold, took us off the Bretton Woods Accord, put us onto a sovereign, free-floating fiat currency, removed the peg from the commodity, and now our dollar is only backed by the full faith and credit of the United States and the natural resources, the real resources, be it human capital, be it production, be it the mountains, the rivers, the ore, the oil, whatever, everything. Not one thing, not petrodollars, everything. The productive capacity of the United States, our real resources, is what backs up the U.S. dollar. And to drive the need for that piece of paper, the government issues a tax. That tax is meant to be used to drive the need for the currency. Otherwise, you could use Bitcoin, or you could use chicken necks, or you could use diamonds, or barrels of oil, or whatever it is you want. Lucky rabbit's foot, who knows? But because the government issues a tax that's payable only in its currency, that is what drives the value of the dollar, the need for the dollar, because the dollar is, in essence, a tax credit. The government says we will take $1 for $1 in tax liability. Now, this is going to sound funny if you've never heard this before. But if you've heard this before, just ride along with me for a minute. When the government spends money, it spends money into existence. It doesn't require funding. It doesn't require financing. It doesn't require taxes. It spends first and then taxes some of it back later. So when you say the government's printing money, well, first of all, the government doesn't just print money. Back in the gold standard era, we would print so much money against so many gold reserves. We don't do that anymore. Our currency is largely digital, and there's just enough printed money to handle ATM and bank teller requests. That's it. The rest is keystrokes on a ledger, nothing more. And so when you say, when the government spends, are they just printing more money? You got to remember, whenever the government spends, the federal government spends $1 exactly one time. And it spends it one time into existence to whatever it's spending it on. A government contract, a military installation, whatever. A Social Security payment. And so when it taxes, it deletes that dollar out of existence. And it creates a bit of a circuit. Money is spent into the economy. Money is taxed out of the economy. And that's what drives it. It seems simple enough. Should seem simple enough. So a government that creates its own currency, that has the sovereign issuance capacity over its currency, like the United States, like Japan, like the UK, like Russia, like China, like Australia. These countries have a monopoly issuing power over their currency. All of them have central banks. And all of their central banks have other private banks that work within it. And all of them have given their blessing, if you will, to those banks to give and extend credit to people. So when the government spends money, it's just spending what we call net financial assets into the economy, because that dollar doesn't have to be paid back. The dollar only gets paid back when somebody runs into an issue where they have to pay a tax. That's not a pay-for thing. It just, you run into a tax, it's paid back. But when you take out a bank loan, that money has to be paid back. And what happens is that the banks take on reserves to offset loans they make out of thin air. There's no fractional reserve system. Banks don't have a reserve requirement. And those banks deal in the open market, and they buy and sell reserves to cover payments and nothing more. And when you pay your loan back on the ledger, you have an asset, you have a liability. When that bank loan is paid back, it balances out and it goes to zero. The bank keeps the interest payments. That's how they make their money. But you, on the other hand, you get your toy, you get your car, you get your student loan, you get your whatever. That's how it works. The federal government, though, when it spends, it does it for whatever reason it wants, because Article 1, Section 8 of our U.S. Constitution says that Congress alone has the authority to authorize spending. And so when Congress spends, when Congress chooses to spend, it issues instructions to the Federal Reserve, who then keystrokes deposits into the Treasury, who then disperses payments to wherever. It's that simple. So when you ask, how are you going to pay for a program? The only answer that should matter to you whatsoever is Congress will authorize spending. It's not how are we going to raise taxes. We don't have to raise taxes. There may be offsets because different spending has different purposes and can get into different people's hands and can create asset bubbles and can create all kinds of different market problems that we don't maybe want, maybe are not desirable, maybe really exacerbate income inequality, whatever. Whatever it is, we may have some offsets that we have to do, but they are never to pay for a program. The government neither has nor has not money. It creates it every time it decides to spend. Way back when, in the beginning of time, government said we have to provision ourselves. How do we get these aqueducts built? How do we get these roadways built? How do we get, all these things done? They could just make people slaves, or they could pay them something to get people to come to work. Well, people, what are you going to pay them with? People are out there farming, they're out there fishing, they're out there doing whatever they're doing. Why in the world do I need to work for you, Mr. Government? I've got all I need here on my farm. So the government says, we're going to issue a tax on your house, payable only in the king's gold. You can only keep your house if you pay your tax. Well, how do I get this king's gold? Thanks for asking. You come and help us build an aqueduct. You come and help us build a road. We'll give you X number of king's gold, and you can pay your taxes in it. The rest you can keep for buying and selling things. Guy's like, I guess I better go get a job. So by issuing a tax, governments created the first unemployed person. And so since governments created this unemployed person, today we look at that and we say, well, wait a minute. We have unemployment. Why do we have unemployment? Because the government issues a tax but doesn't provide a job anymore. There's not enough jobs provided to prevent it, to make sure that the tax and all that is required to survive is covered. So this is where the job guarantee comes in. Government has created this problem by issuing the tax. Now you could say, well, get rid of the tax, but then you wouldn't have a currency. And believe me, you need something to drive that currency. Otherwise, it's worthless. Then you do have a hyperinflation. Just ask the Confederacy sometime. They'll tell you all about it. Anyway, taking it back, long story shorter, a Green New Deal doesn't require all your taxes to pay for it. Medicare for all, because it's highly efficient, may actually be deflationary, may require a tax cut. Infrastructure. We don't need to raise taxes for that, but guess what? The more we employ, the closer to zero unemployment we get. Once we hit zero unemployment, now we got to start talking about that big inflation word. Because real resources are the constraint that really impacts inflation. It's always some form of scarcity that creates these sorts of things. Now, there are push, demand pull, demand. There's several different ways inflation can crop up. But one of the most vital ones to understand is that if there is not enough of a given needed substance or product or whatever available for purchase, people are going to fight over that. And that will drive up the cost of that one thing. Maybe not the cost of everything. And real inflation is a persistent rise in overall prices, not just one thing. So you look at Medicare for all. You got to ask yourself, do we have enough doctors? Do we have enough gurneys? Do we have enough hospitals? Do we have enough things? Maybe we don't. We have to look at that. And that's a real resource constraint as to whether or not we can perform effectively to provide these services. You look over there at infrastructure. Do we have enough workers that can actually rebuild our nation's crumbling infrastructure? Do we have enough metal? Do we have enough whatever it is? It is never a financial constraint because we have, as a nation, the ability to spend money into existence. Now, all this should raise some major questions in your head, like, if this is true, Steve Grumbine, then how come we haven't fixed Flint's pipes? And how come Flint doesn't have clean drinking water? And I'd say that's a very good question, my friend. Why don't they? And I would suggest it's because very good people that are very good activists are fighting the wrong battle. Local community activists that are desperately fighting for water and trying to show the evils of the local corruption that's going on don't realize that the real fix here is to wipe those turkeys out and go for the federal government and get them to pay for this thing outright with an emergency fund. Because the government has the money. It can do it. It doesn't have the money. It can create the money at will. Same thing with Puerto Rico. Why the hell isn't Puerto Rico fully fixed? Questions you should be asking yourself. Which brings us back again to the progressive movement and this 2020 election. When you hear people talking, and you look at Donald Trump, and you look at the various candidates running for office, and you look at what Bernie's economic team has been teaching us now for years and years, you realize money is not an object here. There is such a thing as a free lunch. That's a conservative lie that they say there is no free lunch. There is a free lunch. And it's not a bad thing. Sometimes we need to get rid of the debts and chains that hold us down so that we can have a better tomorrow. And the way this system is rigged, the way the economy is rigged, people of color are dramatically impacted by this. So we have to look at these programs that help all people. But we really have to look at how do we make restitution to African descendants of slaves. Get this thing right. And we've got to look at other areas where we've really harmed people. and not look at it like they're taking your hard-earned tax dollars to do these things. These are fixes that are long overdue, whatever they look like. It's not your tax dollar that will pay for it. So instead of worrying about how this will impact you, worry more about making right the wrongs that America was built on the backs of slaves. And when Bernie Sanders, or whoever it is, gets that conversation going, gets panels going, gets people talking, make sure that you understand how this is paid for. And don't allow your fear and all this nonsense you've heard interfere with the idea that not only can we do this, we must do this. And this 2020 election, I have a feeling it's going to be severely impacted by how we go about discussing this. And the flip side to this, which should frighten us all, it's really going to come down to these two characters right here. Anybody else is not going to have a bold progressive agenda. And Donald Trump is the other side of that ticket. Choose wisely, my friends. I'm Steve with Real Progressives. Please follow us on Twitter, follow us on YouTube, follow us on Instagram. And if you get a chance, by all means, please donate to us on Patreon or on PayPal. We need monthly donations, please. Helps us be able to create studios and get to events and be able to really, really provide you with good quality alternative media and activism and policy help and education. If you've never heard this message before, keep following us. Tune in. We assure you, we haven't changed in the years that we've been here, and we're not going to change. We're going to keep fighting for progress. And on that note, have a great night, everybody. I'm out.